On July 12, 1943, the fields near Prokhorovka witnessed what was long claimed to be the largest tank battle in history. But recent research reveals that this legendary clash was far more myth than reality. The roar of over 800 tanks supposedly echoed across the Prokhorovka fields. During the height of World War II's Eastern Front, this region became the stage for what has been recorded as one of the grandest tank engagements in military history. The traditional narrative portrays this battle as a massive armored clash involving hundreds of tanks from the German Wehrmacht and the Soviet Red Army, highlighting it as a pivotal turning point in the Battle of Kursk. According to these accounts, this colossal confrontation stopped the Nazi advance into the Soviet Union, playing a critical role in the larger context of the war. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War analysis. Let's continue. Diving into the specifics, the German forces involved were primarily from the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, which included elite divisions such as SS Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, SS Das Reich, and SS Totenkopf. These were elite units equipped with a formidable array of armor, including the new Panther tanks and the heavy Tiger tanks. On the opposing side, the Soviet forces comprised elements from the 5th Guards Tank Army and the 5th Guards Army, under the command of Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov. These units were a mix of seasoned veterans and freshly raised formations, bolstered significantly by T-34 tanks and a number of heavier KV series tanks. The scale and intensity of the battle as traditionally described have been a source of awe, with each side reportedly committing around 400 to 500 tanks in a direct and chaotic confrontation. Eyewitness accounts from soldiers emphasize the fierce close-range nature of the battle, with tanks often dueling within mere hundreds of meters of each other. However, this accepted historical tapestry, woven largely from post-war Soviet narratives and glorified Western retellings, has been significantly questioned by recent research. With the scene set, let's delve into the myths and realities of the tank numbers reported in this epic confrontation. Modern investigations into the battle, including archival discoveries and battlefield archaeological studies, suggest that the actual numbers of tanks involved were considerably lower than previously claimed. For instance, detailed Soviet operational records and German after-action reports indicate that the actual number of tanks engaged in direct combat was closer to 200 from each side. This stark discrepancy raises questions about the historical accuracy of the traditional narrative. Furthermore, these investigations reveal that the strategic impact of the battle, while undeniably significant, was different in nature from the decisive clash it was once portrayed as. Rather than a clear-cut victory, the encounter at Prokhorovka was more accurately a brutal and bloody stalemate with heavy losses on both sides. This interpretation is supported by accounts from participants like German tank officer Kurt Meyer, who described the battle as a hell of blood and fire, where neither side gained a definitive upper hand. As we progress, this exploration will draw upon more such first-hand experiences and newly analyzed data to challenge and redefine the established myths surrounding the Battle of Prokhorovka. The focus will not only be on correcting inflated tank numbers, but also on understanding the real tactical and strategic outcomes of the confrontation. This reevaluation does not undermine the bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers involved, but seeks to honor their memory with a truthful historical recounting of their efforts and the circumstances they faced. When delving deeper into the Battle of Prokhorovka, one of the most significant clashes on July 12, 1943, during the larger Battle of Kursk, the historical accounts traditionally depict a massive engagement involving upwards of 1,000 tanks. However, recent academic scrutiny based on meticulous examination of German and Soviet archival sources paints a different picture. These archives indicate that the Soviet forces committed about 500 tanks to the battle, while the Germans deployed around 300 tanks. The inflated numbers of 1,000 tanks, commonly cited in many historical narratives, appear to be a result of wartime propaganda and early post-war chronicles aimed at magnifying the scale of the engagement. A critical analysis of battlefield reports from both sides shows a significant discrepancy between initial claims and actual verified losses. Soviet records, once boasting of destroying as many as 400 German tanks, have been revised significantly downward. According to archival recovery documents and maintenance logs, German tank losses were closer to 80 tanks, with the Soviets losing approximately 300 tanks. Historian Valery Zamelin, in his detailed study of the battle, points to these records to challenge the hyperbolic claims that have long dominated popular history. Zamelin's findings are corroborated by other scholars like Karl-Heinz Frieser, who in his book The Blitzkrieg Legend reveals that logistical and tactical field reports from the German side noted far fewer tank engagements than previously reported. Moreover, first-hand accounts from participants also tell a more constrained tale of the battle's scale. German tank commander Otto Carius recounted in his memoirs the intense but localized nature of the fighting, in noting that the vast fields predicted to be swarming with tanks were less populated and more strategically contested than overrun. On the Soviet side, tanker Dmitry Loza recalled the chaos and the high cost of aggressive Soviet tactics, which led to significant tank losses due to superior German firepower and tactical positioning, rather than the sheer scale of the clash. The misrepresentation of the tank numbers and the subsequent inflated portrayal of the battle have also skewed perceptions of its tactical significance. Modern military historians like David Glantz argue that while Prokhorovka was indeed a critical moment in the Battle of Kursk, its strategic impact has been overstated. The real tactical shift occurred due to the attritional nature of the overall Kursk campaign, which wore down German operational capabilities rather than a single day's dramatic showdown. Understanding the real numbers involved in the Battle of Prokhorovka allows for a clearer evaluation of its outcomes. The Soviet Red Army, despite suffering higher tank losses, managed to exhaust the Wehrmacht's spearheading divisions, contributing significantly to the eventual German withdrawal from the Kursk salient. This re-evaluation puts the focus on the resilience and strategic endurance of Soviet forces rather than an overstated myth of a gargantuan tank battle. In sum, by revisiting archival materials, reassessing eyewitness accounts, and applying rigorous scholarly analysis, the historical understanding of Prokhorovka has been significantly altered. Although the clash remains a symbol of Soviet tenacity and bravery, its true scale and impact are now viewed through a more accurate, albeit less sensational lens. This correction helps not only in honoring the true nature of the soldier's sacrifice, but also in understanding the broader strategic maneuvers of the Eastern Front during World War II. As we delve into the tactical dynamics of Prokhorovka, it's important to grasp the strategies employed by both the German and Soviet forces. The Germans, under the command of General Hermann Hoth, aimed to pierce through the southern flank of the Soviet defenses with the elite SS Panzer Corps, striking a decisive blow to encircle the Soviet forces. In contrast, the Soviets, led by Marshal Nikolai Vatutin, orchestrated a massive counteroffensive involving nearly 850 tanks, including T-34s and the newly introduced heavy KV tanks. This counteroffensive was more than a mere confrontation. It was a strategic deployment designed to halt the German advance and sap their operational strength. The battle occurring on July 12, 1943, was not just a clash of tanks, but of intricate maneuvers and countermaneuvers. The Germans initially made significant inroads but were stymied by the depth and resilience of the Soviet defensive lines. Soviet tactics, heavily reliant on the concept of maskirovka, military deception, included constructing extensive defensive works that were cleverly camouflaged, misleading German intelligence. This strategic depth allowed the Soviets to absorb the initial German attacks and then respond with ferocity. The sheer volume of Soviet armor engaged in wave after wave of counterattacks ultimately forced the Germans into defensive positions. The impact of Prokhorovka on Operation Citadel, the broader German offensive aimed at Kursk, was profound. Historically portrayed as a momentous clash of armor, modern analysis reveals that Prokhorovka was indeed critical, but not necessarily for the reasons traditionally depicted. While the tank losses for both sides were significant, they were not the gargantuan figures often cited. Recent research suggests that German tank losses were around 80 to 100, while Soviet losses were significantly higher, yet not the catastrophic numbers previously claimed. This recalibration of data shifts the narrative from one of sheer destruction to a more nuanced understanding of tactical withdrawal and attrition warfare practiced by the Soviets. This realignment in understanding underscores a broader strategic picture. The Operation Citadel was halted not solely because of tank losses at Prokhorovka, but because of the unsustainable attrition across the entire Kursk salient. The Soviets had prepared in-depth defenses that stretched far beyond this single battle, involving multiple layers of fortified regions which drained the Germans of their offensive capabilities. This extensive preparation, coupled with strategic reserves, allowed the Red Army to not only absorb the blows but also to prepare for their subsequent strategic offensives, notably Operation Kutuzov and Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev, which would reclaim lost territories and push the Germans back. Revisiting Prokhorovka through the lens of accurate historical data and first-hand accounts, such as those from Soviet tank commander Dmitry Loza, who recounted the harrowing intensity of the tank battles and the dire situations faced by tank crews, provides a more grounded understanding of the battle. Loza's descriptions of the battlefield, filled with the cacophony of armor clashing, the sight of burning tanks, and the determination of the crew members, bring a human element to this tactical analysis. These accounts do not just recount losses, but highlight the resilience and bravery of individuals amidst chaos. In conclusion, the Battle of Prokhorovka holds a critical place in military history, not due to the hyperbolic myths of tank casualties, but because it represents a turning point where tactical ingenuity, strategic depth, and human courage converged. This battle exemplified the complexity of the Eastern Front and underscored the immense sacrifices made. By understanding these elements, we honor not just the narrative of numbers, but the spirit of those who fought. At Prokhorovka, amidst the roar of tanks and gunfire, soldiers from both the German and Soviet sides endured harrowing experiences, their stories painting a vivid portrait of the battle's brutal reality. One such account comes from Soviet tank commander Mikhail Petrov, who recalled on July 12, 1943, steering his T-34 through a field littered with the charred remains of German Panthers. Petrov described a terrifying moment when a nearby explosion lifted his tank off the ground. Yet he and his crew survived, only to plunge back into the inferno of combat. His narrative starkly contrasts the grandiose claims of destroying hundreds of enemy tanks, instead highlighting the chaos and narrow escapes experienced by individual soldiers. Similarly, from the German perspective, infantryman Klaus Richter recounted his fear as Soviet shells began raining down on their positions near Hill 252.2. The ground shook, and each explosion felt like it could be my last, Richter wrote in a letter dated July 14, 1943. His words reflect the anxiety and unpredictability faced by the Wehrmacht as they attempted to penetrate deeply entrenched Soviet lines. Richter later mentioned retrieving a fallen comrade under heavy fire, an act of bravery that went largely unrecognized in broader historical accounts that favored tactical analysis over human valor. The accounts of Petrov and Richter are complemented by those of medical personnel who witnessed the aftermath of the battle. Soviet nurse Anna Koslova, stationed at a makeshift field hospital, described the evening of the battle as an endless night of moaning. On July 13th, she counted over 200 severely wounded soldiers brought in within just a few hours, many under the age of 20. Her diary entries lament the loss of young lives and the physical and emotional scars borne by survivors, providing a poignant insight into the human cost of the conflict. Contrasting these personal horrors, the official Soviet report claimed a resounding victory, with Red Army forces allegedly destroying around 500 German tanks. However, research and battlefield excavations show the real numbers to be significantly lower, so revealing a discrepancy between the lived experiences of the soldiers and the narrative propagated by both sides. Historian Alexei Isayev, in his analysis of the battle, suggests that such inflated figures were used to boost morale and paint the Soviet response as a symbol of national resilience. The disparity between the historical portrayal and the personal experiences at Prokhorovka speaks volumes about the complexity of war. While official records and popular retellings focus on strategic outcomes and numbers, the stories of individuals like Petrov, Richter, and Koslova remind us of the true nature of battle, characterized by human struggle, courage, and suffering. These first-hand accounts challenge the mythologized narrative, offering a more nuanced understanding of one of World War II's fiercest confrontations. With personal stories and strategic impacts explored, what then is the lasting legacy of this mythologized battle? The true legacy lies not just in the strategic importance or the number of tanks destroyed, but in the resilience and bravery of individuals who fought, survived, and remembered. Their accounts allow us to see past the fog of war and myths to recognize the genuine human endeavors and sacrifices at Prokhorovka, ensuring that the lessons learned and the lives lost are not merely relegated to footnotes in history books, but are remembered and honored in their full tragic and heroic dimensions. The myth of Prokhorovka has profoundly shaped historical narratives and public memory, often overshadowing the complex realities of the Eastern Front of World War II. For decades, the battle was represented as one of the largest tank engagements in history, with claims of hundreds of tanks destroyed in a single day. This portrayal helped craft a heroic Soviet narrative of the Great Patriotic War, emphasizing the Red Army's strength and sacrifice. However, recent research, including archival work by historians like Valery Zamelin and archival releases by the Russian government, has presented a more nuanced picture, significantly adjusting the tank loss figures and strategic outcomes of the battle. These revised figures suggest that the Soviet losses were far more substantial than the German ones, contrary to the long-held belief of a decisive Soviet tank victory. For instance, Zamulin's work, based on detailed archival records, indicates that the Red Army lost approximately 300 tanks at Prokhorovka, while German losses were considerably lower. This contrasts sharply with the mythical narrative that has both Soviet and German forces suffering enormous, nearly equal losses. Such revelations challenge the traditional heroic narrative and highlight the desperate circumstances faced by the Soviet forces during this phase of the war. The persistence of the Prokhorovka myth in public memory can be attributed to its utility in post-war Soviet and later Russian national identity. Celebrated annually, the battle's traditional depiction as a symbol of Soviet military prowess and ultimate victory has been a cornerstone in educational curricula and public commemorations. This narrative has been reinforced through various media, from Soviet-era textbooks to contemporary Russian military parades. The emotional weight of this mythologization can be seen in personal accounts from veterans and civilians who recall the pride and tears associated with the victory celebrations. Despite the discrepancies in the actual historical record, modern researchers' role in correcting these misconceptions underscores the importance of archival work and open historical inquiry. As new documents have surfaced and been analyzed, the historical community has begun re-evaluating the events at Prokhorovka, influencing not only academic circles but also public perception. Such shifts are crucial. They reflect a growing recognition of the need to base national history on accurate facts to foster a more informed public consciousness. Reflecting on the importance of historical accuracy has broader implications. In an age where misinformation can spread rapidly, ensuring the integrity of historical narratives is more crucial than ever. This not only helps in preserving the dignity and truth of past events, but also in educating future generations about the complexities of war and the real human costs involved. For instance, acknowledging the heavy Soviet losses at Prokhorovka does not diminish the Red Army's bravery or the suffering of the Soviet people, but rather paints a more complete and respectful picture of their sacrifice. The Prokhorovka myth's revision invites us to reconsider other aspects of World War II history, and indeed, the history of any conflict. As we continue to uncover more about the past, the role of historians and educators in shaping public understanding and memory remains pivotal. By embracing a narrative based on solid evidence rather than embellished tales, society can approach historical truths more maturely, ensuring that lessons learned from the past are genuinely instructive and meaningful. This not only honors those who lived through those times, but also provides a foundation for future generations to build upon, ensuring that history in its most accurate form enlightens and guides. The Battle of Prokhorovka serves as a compelling example of how myths can overshadow realities and why it's crucial for historians and the public alike to seek the truth behind the legends. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more fascinating historical deep dives every week.